Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're coming in from. My name is Hannah Norberg, and I am the president of the TradeExperettes. You are tuning in to the second of the 3 webinars in our series that is called The Road to Yaoundé, where we are gathering experts to help everybody, but in particular LDCs and developing countries, trade officials, to prepare for MC14, the negotiations there on digital trade, or e-commerce as it's called in the WTO lingo. This series will run for about an hour. This is the second of 3, and it will be followed by a 1-page write-up, and that 1-page write-up with policy conclusions so that it can travel easily to capitals. And so if you know of anybody who you could spread this word to that would benefit from this information, we'd be very happy if you did so. So this is the second of the webinars, and the third one will be held on February 22nd, I think, if somebody's going to, and then we're going to have a grand finale, February 12th in Geneva. And then there's a grand finale in person. So if you want to be part of that, please make sure that you sign up. While we're here, also use the Q&A box to get us with any questions or comments that you have as we go along. Okay, and this, I should also say that this series is organized by the TradeExperettes, but we are gratefully supported by Microsoft and MasterCard and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. So I'm super happy. I am so thrilled to have these speakers with me today because we have an amazing network, and we're happy enough to get that magical day where people could come and speak to us and help share their knowledge with regards to digital trade. So today we have Johannes Friis, who is the CEO for the St. Gallen Endowment for Prosperity Through Trade. And then we have Khalil Garbia, who is the Director for Trade Policy, Senior Director for Trade Policy at Microsoft. And then we have Isabel de Sola, who just got to El Salvador just a little bit. Oh, so thank you so much for getting off the plane and jumping right in here. She is the head of the coordination unit at the UN's Office for Digital and Emerging Technology. And today we're going to talk about the regulations that are ongoing and how the rules of the road are written for data flows and digital rules in general. And so I'm going to let Johannes kick us off with giving sort of the global view of what's going on and what you're seeing in general, and also at the Digital Trade Alert. And I would very much like to have this more of a conversation. So if anybody, feels like you want to riff off the other ones, then go ahead and do that. But otherwise, we're going to go with Johannes and then Khalil and then Isabel, and then we're going to turn out the tables and go backwards. And also do keep in mind that I will be asking everybody for a so-called elevator pitch, because as we know, not only are the missions super, super, super busy, but so are the trade ministers. And there are a gazillion things on their desks. So in case we manage to catch one in an elevator, what is the most important lesson that you would like, or most important policy implication that you would like them to take away from this conversation? Just a little heads up that will be coming. So without further ado, Johannes, would you like to start us off with giving a global overview of where we are and how this all works?
Hi, Hannah. Hi, TradeExperettes. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and happy to engage. I was asked to explain how everything works so that we can close the webinar at 3:15. I'll take a little while, and I have here to answer 2 questions, really. How do national regulations have cross-border effects? Because that's kind of what we're worrying when we're talking about trade in the digital sphere. And then why is the WTO still central, or what has central roles that it has right now in governing digital trade, and how do other things such as plurilateral agreements fit in? And so before I want to adjust this, I want to briefly adjust the lens a little bit in these two questions, because based in Switzerland, and as you know, there is a meeting going on right now, not too far away from me on another mountain. And there, Prime Minister Carney gave a speech this week that I think got any one of us that is in this working this sphere thinking a bit about international economic governance, because his core message was that we are in the midst of a rupture and not a transition. He said that we may, what many of us may have known publicly, right, but not said so, that the rules-based international order is under strain, under very severe strain, that the strongest may be taking exemptions, and we have seen that in the past, that we have some sorts of asymmetric enforcement, but we always did it that way. It's always been that way. We have always participated in these rituals because it was, as he said, a useful fiction. And he says also the bargain no longer works because the powers are now deviating again. And what do we do here as middle powers? He said for Canada. And on that context, I was like, okay, now what does this mean for officials from smaller economies, from when they're preparing for MC4P? And what I was thinking about, and also had a chat with Hannah just recently, is like, I'd argue that it makes Geneva more important, not less. Okay, Swiss have always reasons to find Geneva important, but I think there are some legitimate reasons to think of Geneva as a platform, maybe not as a center of multilateral rules. So here's why. When great powers go bilateral, I think they can pick off smaller countries one by one. And the WTO is where you have collective voice, where there's institutionalized weight, where this is a venue where you can find like-minded partners. And so this is a place where we can get to the table rather than be on the menu, to use Mr. Carney's words, as middle powers that the Swiss are also. So let me, with this lens shift in mind, because it's been heavily on my mind recently, and not just for the last 2 days, let me go through these questions. We are here to think about how do digital regulations have cross-border effects, and why may the WTO, of all places, be one where you can tackle them. So I run the Digital Policy Alert, which is a transparency initiative monitoring digital laws and regulations in 60 markets, all areas of governance, from data flows, anything AI. We have content moderation. We also have competition and its enforcement in the digital space. And so we have tracked over 10,500 different digital policy measures for the last 4 years alone. This is immense domestic regulatory activity. For us, it's off the charts, we can say, because we're the only chart around. Governments feel they must act, and we understand so. There are big public policy objectives at stake, but they do so without international coordination. And that's a problem. And I'll just give you 4 of them that we always address in these conversations. So one is some digital rules have direct extraterritorial applications. Example here is GDPR. It applies where any entity that wants to process EU residence data, or Swiss data for that fact, and the UI Act, if it comes around, may have a similar effect. These aren't accidents, right? These are features. Major powers want to export their regulatory preferences to other market access. Brussels effect is one of those, best known, right? Brussels, capital of the European Commission, where it says when large markets regulate, everyone serving these markets must comply. Arbitrage becomes impossible. The other way fragmented digital rulemaking can be important is that it's a conditional market access. You have data localization requirements, which were like the grandmother of all digital regulation that we worried about at TradeExperettes. Local presence mandates, content moderations and obligations. All these are tied to operational licensing, maybe. You have to comply with them when you go into the market. Market access isn't just getting your bits to the other island. No, it's really about making sure that whatever content is coming through those bits lives up to the standards over there. And if those are not coordinated, this may be a problem. And another poster child that we always think about when we talk about fragmented digital regulation and its cross-border effect is that fragmented digital regulation is a compliance burden that, yes, the big ones like Microsoft that we have here on the call, or a Google or another international tech giant can manage, because they have the resources and power to do that, comply with all kinds of regulations. For smaller companies, this is much as a problem. For SMEs that we talk to on a weekly basis here at Digital Policy Alert, we help them think about, if you want to get to a different market, is that regulatory environment so different in the ASEAN region from Europe, from Africa, or from the United States? So here, this is where the stage is, that fragmentation can be a problem when all the governments are going at this public policy objectives without coordination much. Now, why could the WTO, of all places, be one where digital governance can be upheld? So again, let me be direct, obviously, in this context. If we are asking whether the WTO is where the deep, binding digital rules are being made, the answer is no. But key players have withdrawn, from the JSI data provisions, dispute settlement in the WTO, not working. The moratorium on customs duties survives every ministerial, as we know, by the skin of its teeth. This year, it's different. The substantive commitments that are being made elsewhere, right? We know that. DEPA, digital economy agreements, comprehensive economic partnership agreements. Think of Singapore, it has become a hub, right? Appearing in our count, 7 of the 13 existing AI governance provisions in international trade agreements. The UAE has 6. Australia and New Zealand are also active when it is about making commitments with respect to artificial intelligence. But none of this is happening in Geneva. Still, I think the WTO's value for small economies isn't that this is where the hardest commitments are made. It's that WTO, the Geneva, provides things that bilateral negotiations don't. And let's give me 5. First, I said at the beginning, Geneva is where we have a collective voice, the African group, the LDC group. These have weight in Geneva. In bilateral negotiations with major powers, LDCs are alone. You have institutionalized participation, a seat at the table. You have speaking rights. Process includes you by default. So polylateral clubs may or may have that, depending on where you want to go. Capacity building. Technical assistance programs exist in Geneva. For missions with limited resources, Geneva can provide support that bilateral negotiations, again, don't have. Geneva is, even though it may be soft, it's a reference point. The WTO outcomes create benchmarks that one can invoke elsewhere. This is the international standard. It is. And that's leverage in bilateral talks. And finally, Geneva is a place to find partners. Geneva is where you find like-minded countries that you might take the relationship bilateral or plurilateral later, but in Geneva is where you meet. So this is why I think the WTO, out of all places, is still a forum where we can come together and start discussions to avoid the fragmentation that I was describing a bit earlier, even though there may be other places that we can take it to. And there's even more that one could do at the WTO, but I've already overstayed my welcome a little bit. I'd rather hear Khalil and my colleagues talk more before coming back into the conversation.
Thank you so much for that, Johannes. The way that I think about it is, if that's useful, is that, I mean, with this brave new world, right, in digital world, if nothing else, it's the best place where we can crowdsource really good, our best bets going forward. And I think one of the things that really speaks for that is the e-commerce moratorium that has been around for 26 years or something, right? And they had, so that was the wording came out wrong because e-commerce came to mean something else, but the value has been enormous.
Yeah.
Kelly, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, because you were conversational. I also agree, and it's not just that one can go to Geneva to have coffee. There is also serious stuff going on. I think, for instance, we talked in the prep about the TBT committee, and this is a technical committee. It's technical work, it's unglamorous, but this is something where I could see a digital extension to do serious work about thinking how fragmented regulatory approaches align or don't align, and where they create international spillovers systematically in working groups, not just over coffee. Just to say that.
Fantastic. Very good point. And often overlooked, but incredibly important. So Khalil, you are now in the private sector, but before that, you have also been working in government. And to me, these rules sort of are the trade agreements are the rules of the road. But at the end of the day, we need to rope in those who are driving on them, the private sector. And so what are you seeing as you're turning the tables? And I think also for those who are listening here, I think it's really important to understand the role that Microsoft plays here, that it's really one of those digitally delivered services that is used as a production factor, as an input for a lot of things, which I think as an economist, I'm so fascinated by. What are your thoughts here, Khalil?
Thank you, Hannah, and thanks, Johannes. It's a great setup. So I'm Khalil Garbia. I'm the Senior Director for Trade Policy for Microsoft in Washington, D.C., and I think Johannes did a great job speaking to sort of the geopolitical backdrop, the concerns of some members, um, and as the business representative in this discussion, I want to cover a little bit of the economic and sort of technological change backdrop and then how it fits into WTO discussions and how members may think of their own regulatory landscape and future direction in trade discussions. And I had some of the guiding questions were around what digital trade rules look like from businesses' perspective and how free trade initiatives shape business operations. And so I think this is all interconnected, and including with the moratorium, and we'll want to try to piece that together. So starting with where we are from a tech perspective, it is really a time of rapid change, and I think so much so that it's hard for governments to keep up. It's hard for it's a challenging amount of change really for everyone to understand what some of these new capabilities are, how it will impact the workplace and international commerce. And we really look at digital technology, in particular artificial intelligence, as a new general purpose technology that will have cascading impacts across the economy and across trade. And one insight that we want to offer, and that I think has a huge bearing on how less developed countries and all economies really think about technology and their approach to digital trade, is that it's not who has the most advanced model, um, but who adopts the technology and sort of diffuses it across the economy and puts the technology to work that will gain the most from it. And that's been true of railroads and electricity and all these other prior technologies that we see as comparable to AI. Um, and so it's really, optimistically, I think, an opportunity for all countries to lean in um, to adopt technology more quickly than they have before. And we do see mixed results early on. It's something that Microsoft has been particularly attuned to, looking at adoption across economies. There's a report we just put out, the second iteration, and it's something we'll do twice a year on global AI adoption. And it has some interesting data. So for instance, that the UAE and Singapore have done the most to adopt technology, and the United States is actually 24th in our most recent uh, summary of data, and you can kind of look at that and take it as a proxy for both the sort of amount of economic change that's already happened, but really the opportunity for growth. And while the report highlights that there are major disparities, and that in the so-called global north there is substantially more adoption, it's also the case that this is a technology, when you compare it to prior eras in history, that is diffusing much faster globally and to all economies, and is just much more readily available. And it starts to get to what Hannah was saying about tools and factors of production, that um, there are still barriers, right? There's electricity availability in some countries. There's connectivity. There are some barriers to adoption that we still need to work through that are pretty fundamental. Um, but by and large, the case is really that those barriers are much less than in prior technology waves, and that the rate of adoption in the global south is much faster than it was with electricity, or sort of like pick your prior period of infrastructure. So that I think is just very fundamental to how countries should look at digital trade. So then turning to, what we find the most value in, and you know what that means for trade agreements. I mean, I think that they continue to have an important role for providing clarity, predictability, a standard to meet that sets a sort of like rule of law baseline on how intellectual property will be treated, um, on the rules of the road, as Hannah said, for market access, and that then attracts investment. And that continues to be fundamental, notwithstanding some disruption and other changes in the global economy. And so looking at that from the signal of what we really want is to attract investment in our digital economy. It continues to be a key way to signal sort of openness, readiness, and interest in a framework that would facilitate that investment, and then build on that with really practical rules on signatures, on simplification that again will just amplify the kind of impact that your economy can get from digital trade. And then finally, and maybe most fundamentally, making it about enhancing trust. Trust is critical. And so, how do these agreements address issues like consumer protection and fraud and privacy and many other issues that are top of mind? Because if the technology isn't ultimately serving those social aims, then it's not good for much. So I guess to wrap on the e-commerce moratorium, we view that as the most fundamental piece of the trade architecture supporting digital trade, and it's making it permanent would bring that stability and predictability in that most fundamental way, right? And that if you look at technology as a building block, then you want to secure that building block so that your SMEs, your companies of all sizes can use it to build. And there's a lot of focus on look at these investment numbers, look at big technology companies, but really a lot of the value is going to be at the application level. How does that technology then translate into value, that economic and social value in each country? And that's where the most opportunity is for small and medium-sized enterprises, and that's where we look at ourselves as a platform for our partners to grow, and our mission is just to help them achieve more with technology that's really about productivity and development, and making the e-commerce moratorium permanent would make that foundation clear, and it would really just take away the sort of overhang of bringing rules around harmonized tariffs and custom schedules that aren't compatible with services, that won't be an efficient way to collect revenue if revenue is ultimately the goal, and then just setting that aside, because the more fundamental interest is in how technology can be used for development, and not how rules can sort of exclude those electronic transmissions or that technology from reaching your country.
Great overview. Thank you so much for that, Khalil. So we've been coming at this from a trade perspective, and as we're moving into this whole, it's a completely different world, right? Trade used to be just, if you think about it, selling a piano and just shipping that across, and now these things that we're touching on are so much wider than just trade related. It goes into the digital, goes into all sorts of other parts of the government. And so I'm so glad to be able to introduce you all to Isabel here, who can talk about how the UN approaches these issues in this new setting for us. We see you perfectly, and there we go. And we can see your presentation
Good
perfectly
morning.
too.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Isabel de Sola. It's really a pleasure to be here with everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I've just landed in San Salvador, El Salvador, where I'm originally from. And so I hope that this will go well. I have really bitten off more than I can chew with this presentation, Hannah. Let me just warn you. So, first of all, I'm here as a guest. I think this is a WTO trade policy circuit. And for those of you who are based in Geneva, you'll realize that there are several communities coexisting in Geneva, and we don't see enough of each other, I think. I am up the hill from the WTO in Palais des Nations. I'm part of a new UN office called ODET, UN Office for Digital and Emerging Technologies. We're perhaps the youngest of all the UN offices. We were effectively created just a year ago. The reason for being of our office has to do with a process that occurred over the last 3 years called the Summit of the Future. The UN, as an institution, alongside the WTO, has been engaging on digital topics for at least 20 years throughout many of our specialized agencies. And then starting in 2018, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres made a strategic decision to put digital technologies at the heart of his modernization agenda for the UN, which culminated at the Summit of the Future, which delivered a statement called the Pact of the Future that includes an annex named the Global Digital Compact. The Global Digital Compact was the UN's biggest update to the digital agenda in over 20 years. And what it did is, I think, take the traditional ICT for development narrative and update it with some nuance and with some new information that had been accumulated over the past 20 years. When the UN as an institution started out on this path, the hope was that technology would be, in fact, a critical enabler of the sustainable development agenda. And in many ways, it was over the last 20 years. However, along the way, we learned collectively that technology is not neutral and that, of course, it would have both positive and negative effects on our societies depending on where we were standing. And that, in fact, applying technology to our development challenges did not immediately yield the results that we wanted. There were, in fact, many building blocks or homework that nations needed to do at home and together through international cooperation to really get the most out of technology. So I'm here as a guest in your trade policy conversation with, I think, a slightly different perspective on the issue. What you see before you in the screen are the 5 pillars of the Global Digital Compact. Some of them will be very familiar. So, closing digital divides, and I think training, capacity building in the digital space are topics that are familiar in the WTO. What the GDC does is link those issues to new and emerging ones. For example, the human rights piece, data governance, and AI. And what the GDC says is you cannot have the best outcomes, or let's put it in a positive tone, you will have the best outcomes if you are linking these 5 pillars and treating each of them as equally critical to digital development. So what does this matter for digital trade? I want to talk about 4 things, and I'm sorry I'm being so long to Cedric and Hannah. I want to talk about 4 things according to those pillars, how they relate to digital trade. So to get the most out of the e-commerce moratorium, from the GDC perspective, you might want to focus on 4 things. First is continuing to close digital divides. Second is data governance, and third is AI governance. In terms of closing digital divides, many digital divides means many different things. First of all, it's the connectivity, it's the infrastructure, then it's the skills, then it's vulnerable groups, it's the languages. Our office has focused on one that's relatively new, which is digital public infrastructure and digital public goods. As it turns out, to get an enabling environment for the digital economy is required. So just like the physical economy, there are policy frameworks, legislation, and infrastructure that help along SMEs to really flourish. And one that has proven to have transformative impact for digital development is, of course, the public infrastructure that can come along with that. So you want to think about DPI as code that is both a technology and a socio-technical architecture. I try to explain it as a road. DPI are roads that public officials can build upon which many different cars, vehicles, all sorts of things can traverse. And there's three fundamental infrastructures that have been very have acted as catalysts for the digital economy, which are identity, payments, and data exchange. Many of you may know these as the stack. There are wonderful examples of them available now. For example, India's digital identity, services in financial services in Portugal, for example, that make it such that all bank machines are connected to the same financial system. So you don't have to go to your own bank's machine. You can go to any bank machine. And then these DPIs enable digital transactions to take place more easily. They make it simpler and safer to buy and trade online. A second issue area that has great importance to the digital economy is data governance. So data in terms of the Global Digital Compact, we think of data as the soil, not as the oil, but as the soil in which much of our digital lives can grow. Governing data has become a very complex and layered endeavor. And it has implications for many public services, health, education, finance, and of course, digital trade. There's a question about whether you need to start at the international level for your data governance. So recognizing that so much data from the get-go has been traversing borders as soon as data is available, it's crossing borders, or whether you need to start locally. I think from the perspective of the Global Digital Compact, it's both. There's homework that needs to be done at the local level, for example, data protection laws. And then there are, I think, important questions of interoperability at the international level. And these have started to make themselves felt through data localization laws, through, as colleagues have said, Khalil and Johannes, through FTAs and bilateral FTAs. And then there are tools, shortcuts, to allow data to traverse borders for public good, which our office is working on. They're called data commons, where just like a park, a public park, a common good, smaller sets of data on health, education, on the Amazon are being put together and ring-fenced by researchers, by institutions, and then shared across borders for public benefit. I have been a recent discoverer of a digital policy website thanks to this invitation. And in our office, we played around with some of the data to understand the trends. One issue area that's creating some concern are data localization laws. And I wanted to know if it's really the case that most of these are popping up in least developed countries or in developing countries. And from the breakdown that we did in our office, it looks like there's a lot of enthusiasm for data localization laws in the developing world. And I hope that in the Q&A, we might discuss why that is. Part of it, I believe, has to do with the way that AI models have been built over the last 3 years, and the scraping of data that happened over the last 3 years in a way that was very sort of a free-for-all. So most of the data of the internet has been scraped up to create large language models, and that has driven some anxiety. This anxiety, you can see it in the wonderful screen, I think, of availability of graphs on Digital Policy Access. I'm providing some free marketing for. I was fascinated to see a timeline and also a comparison of how different countries are producing tools of governance for AI. And it's amazing that over the last few years, over the countries that I'm showing on my screen, there have been dozens, if not hundreds, of instruments that are published to see if we can better govern AI. And that's where the UN comes in. And here, thankfully, I'm coming to a conclusion of my presentation. So in this environment where AI, data, and closing digital divides interact constantly with the digital economy, the UN made a decision in 2024 to drive a policy agenda that would perhaps, in the terms of the WTO, set a level playing field for what comes after that. So in 2024, at the Pact for the Future conclusion, it was decided that 193 countries would pursue two new governance tools at the international level that could perhaps assist us in the current context. One is the UN International Independent Scientific Panel on AI, which will be launched in about a week's time. A scientific panel was deemed a valuable addition to the family of governance tools in that a lot of information about the capabilities of AI is difficult to access. It's held in research centers or by private companies, and there's a great deal of information available in the news, but for policymakers, it's not always clear what that means for their national level frameworks and how to keep pace with that. There's a sensation amongst policymakers that they were falling behind in terms of AI governance, which I think our office is slightly disagrees with that. I think that we've incredibly rapidly engaged with these topics, but the scientific panel nonetheless will produce a report in July or before the month of July and deliver it to the General Assembly on the capabilities of AI and perhaps provide some insights into where policymakers should focus their collaboration. The second of these AI governance tools is called the Global Governance Dialogue on AI. This will be the first, I think, universal membership policy dialogue on AI. There's many that exist already. In India, in 2 weeks, one of these big summits will take place. And there is, of course, the Global Partnership on AI hosted at the OECD. The G20 talks about it, the G7 talks about it, the African Union talks about it. Everyone has a policy dialogue, but they never meet. So this global governance dialogue is like a train station. For those of us that are in Geneva, it is Gare de Cornavin. It's a train station where all the trains must pass through. And it has a 7-point agenda to consider. I think its first outcome will be to set this level playing field of where can our cooperation really focus. So thank you so much, Hannah, for your patience, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you so much for that, Isabel. It was really in depth. Johannes, it's the first time where I've had somebody market somebody else's website. So that's new for me.
New for me too. I enjoyed it very much.
Like to do now is to go backwards and to see what you guys have on your elevator pitch. So Isabel, with all this, this big presentation that you pulled through here, if you manage to run into an ambassador or the trade minister in an elevator, what is the one big takeaway here?
Sure. I would say digital trade, absolutely. And keep working on the bases and the pillars of ensuring that this technology brings the most benefit for your country, which includes closing the digital divides, working on DPI, ensuring you have adequate data governance policies, and linking all of these together under one framework.
Okay, so one framework is your elevator pitch, basically, then.
No, it's more that technology is wonderful, yes, if you have the bases in place to get the most out of it.
Yeah, excellent. Khalil, what are you thinking if you have those 20 seconds?
I would say that the e-commerce moratorium is a quiet success of the world trading system and an important foundation for access to digital technology, and that making it permanent is not inconsistent with having rules that protect your society or raise revenue. It's just there are different mechanisms, and that what you should be most focused on is how you invest in skilling, attract investment, and address your social needs through technology.
Phenomenal. As you may have seen, there are questions coming in the Q&A and also in the comments box. So please take a look. And Johannes, what's your elevator pitch?
Geneva still matters, but different. It's when the rules-based order is fracturing, Geneva matters more, not less, because it's where LDCs have collective voice. Stay in the e-commerce agreement talks. They are soft commitments, but there you can participate as well, and without burdens that you can't meet, and set the platform for going further. And engage in the technical work. Yes, it's currently TPT and standards, but this is where practical regulatory alignment occurs and where we learn how to do this. So Geneva is your hub for learning, for finding partners, and for building coalitions.
Oh, yes.
Ding.
Yes. And I love how Geneva is also your hub, and this is where Isabel found you. So we had to go global to go local. All right. Okay, what's the most pressing other issue that we haven't touched on?
There is one question that came in.
Yeah.
That I could speak to,
go ahead.
others may want to as well. It's a question on whether the rules of the road to attract new investors are designed for, I think, capital attraction or retention, and how public policy regulatory frameworks should adapt to meet expectations for stakeholder validation. I think that you want to design rules both for attraction and retention. I think attraction is always the harder part. Investment can be sticky once it happens, but the more important part of the question really is this one on how to design regulatory frameworks. I think the key is to make it risk-based, define what risks you're most concerned about, and to make the rules as clear and simple as you can, and as stable as you can, and that those are both business priorities, but also just hallmarks of good regulation.
And this ties very well back to a conversation we had in the last episode with Ambassador Boza from Chile. She was talking about the investment facilitation agreement and how that goes hand in hand with these discussions. Johannes, what do you think?
Yeah, very much where Khalil ended. So I think in the digital sphere, we are somewhere where the real economy is going. We have lots of two-lane systems for globalization. For instance, in data protection, personal data has a very different lane and traffic speed than, say, corporate anonymized data or other arms of data. And so I think much of digital regulation and now beyond, where we have two lanes, it's important that governments communicate their intention. Khalid said, what the risks are that you're worried about. Explaining that more. We see that now, say, in foreign direct investment, that there are certain risks that are articulated why some investment goes one lane and the other one stays in the fast lane. And so regulators then are called upon to share more about their mental model, their way of thought, and how they are making those rules and how they intend to apply them, particularly in technologies that are so fast moving that the principles that are in place are much more important than actually the fine letter for understanding where the regulator wants to go.
Exactly. There's another really good question that came in that is how digital trade agreements can accommodate the development interests of small economies. And is there scope for re-energizing the traditional development agenda to enable their fuller and more equitable integration into the digital trading system? I thought that was a very specific and very useful question for this session and the audience here in particular. Who wants to go first?
I can jump in. I feel like each of us probably should speak to this. I think that there is a lot of opportunity to address new issues, figure out ways to better support trust, which, as I mentioned, I think is a key issue. I don't really agree that there are fundamentally different developing country interests in the sense that and Johannes sort of covered this, right? Like the interest in common rules of the road and interoperability does serve small and medium-sized enterprises and developing countries, perhaps even more so than a Microsoft, in that we can and do meet 100 different cybersecurity certifications, right? And we can meet at 101 if we need to. It's additional cost, and we would prefer not to, but it's something that Microsoft is set up to do. But what that functions as is a significant barrier to entry for new companies. So my pitch again is to look at technology as something that's most accessible to startups, both to start up and to scale up using tools that are more available than they ever have been before.
Excellent point, and I'm going to let Isabel come in here in just one second, but I think one point to be made here is that things that we used to think of as being absolute, as in, what trade is or moving cross-border, we might not even, as SMEs, don't even think about that because they just go online and upload something to their app, right? So they don't actually go to the border and sign, for it, but that's how things happen. And the same as in we're thinking about transactions, otherwise that you would buy that piano. And now if you're wearing a smartwatch, every time your heart beats, which is about 100,000 times a day, you're actually doing trade. So it is a very different world than the tangible and that one that we're used to being in. Isabel, come on in.
Sure, Hannah, thanks. And at the risk of being repetitive, I think actually there has been this refresh of the digital development agenda with the Global Digital Compact. And perhaps what could be useful is to open up some more channels of communication between these agendas. So the e-commerce moratorium is happening in the same world as the Global Digital Compact, and it's the same countries, in a sense, that were speaking and negotiating in New York as sitting in Yaoundé in a few months' time. And so taking stock, I think, of the conversations that happened at the UN Secretariat, which is heavily focused on development, and saying, okay, how do we update our conversation at the WTO with these ideas that 5 pillars of digital development are closely linked, and that the digital trade part is linked to closing digital divides, to human rights, to the data governance piece, and also to ensuring that AI doesn't widen the digital divides. I think a lot of work has already been done, and to the extent that this can inform and enrich the discussions at the WTO, it might offer some renewal as well. There's no doubt at all that the technology has driven development and that there's been a tremendous, I think, you know, it's even difficult to describe the impact that this digital technologies have had on our development. And now the message is hopeful, is to say, okay, for this next phase of digital development, we also want to take into consideration some of these risks and some of these issue areas that need fine tuning in order to get the best out of it. So the Global Digital Compact, I think, is not black and white. It's quite nuanced in saying, in order to fulfill the promise, we need to work in this much more sophisticated manner, I think, and thoughtful manner. And yes, thank you.
Johannes.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with also what Isabel said. So there is this usually the infrastructure side of the digital divide that we in the trade world have a split relationship with, say. We focus more on the regulatory aspects. And here I think, for instance, in the area of consumer protection, there is something that can be done through international accords that bilaterally would be probably more difficult to do. All these questions about that I came in about market access certainty is something that one can advance to an agreement. But also investment signaling, really. Having these agreements is, coming to the first question from the audience, also a way to attract investors for the stability they imply, even if they are not as tight as rules as we may know them from the goods trade world. So yeah, these areas having some sort of interoperability, having some assurances for local consumers, but also some major rules that may signal to investment that this is a country that can be dealt with, then yeah, this is where I would see it. Staying away from the infrastructure question that already Isabel raised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, for that, I think that helpfulness is really important to reiterate, Isabel, especially in this day and age. And for a dose of that optimism, I would actually recommend the TradeExperettes. We did a study on how the e-commerce moratorium has impacted women's lives, and especially after COVID, which was decided as being a she session, so a recession, but it would hit women particularly hard. So the she session, and there you see how it has been such an empower, and how, like I said, so many people are jumping on online and not even seeing that they are going global, and the many opportunities that are available there. As always, we run out of time. We always do. So I'm going to go around the circle again to see if there are anything that we haven't touched upon that you would really like to reach out to these trade negotiators that will be working on this in Yaoundé within the next month. Anything that's on your desk that you wish that everybody else knew, this is your opportunity to share that. And I think I'm go first with you, Khalil.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity to speak to this group, and I don't know if I'm able to put a link in the chat. I wanted to share our AI diffusion report, but from my perspective, just really want to speak to the opportunity from digital trade, and the ways that we can partner with countries on skilling and investment and expanding opportunity.
Fantastic. We'll make sure that that link is shared with the report when our one pager here and available on the website as we go forward. Thank you, Khalil. Isabel, what are your closings?
Sure. I'll send the link later. I just wanted to put on our capitals and Geneva's agenda that the AI scientific panel members will be announced in about a week or so, and that we're 5 months away from the Global Governance Dialogue on AI happening in Geneva, which we expect to be a whole of system effort. And so we'd be very eager to ensure that the trade perspectives are part of that conversation and that they're woven into the 7 themes that our leaders will consider and act as sort of one Geneva push on that conversation so that we can consider all of the development opportunities of AI in particular together. Thank you.
Phenomenal, Johannes. Last but not least.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, if I can lift something off my desk, I think again, Isabel, for the shout out earlier. But at the Digital Policy Alert, what we do every month is a roundup of what's going on in laws and regulation for the 60 economies that we track. It's a very easy way to get up to step of what's going on in the world. And if you have any further questions, reach out. I have the joy to be back in session 4 with a tool that we have built to actually look at those regulations and talk to you then.
Yes, so let's actually talk about session 4. So session 4 will be held in Geneva together with the Diplo Foundation and again the St. Gallen Endowment. And what we will be doing is that we will be the trade experts that show up there will actually get some actual training, right, Johannes, on putting together some negotiation texts using AI, which I think is so phenomenal. I think it's the greatest idea ever. So
no, we have agents negotiating with each other. There you go.
Yes, because otherwise it's really hard to know where to start. But that there's a lot of, so trade text specifically is what that builds on, right? So thank you. So we're running out of time. So before we hang up, I would just like to thank you. I would like to thank the team at the TradeExperettes who has been pulling all the threads here in the back. In the background, I would like to thank our sponsors, Microsoft and MasterCard and Konrad Adenauer Foundation for making this at all possible. Our amazing speakers, obviously, Khalil, Isabel, Johannes, thank you. And for the amazing people in the audience today, the Q&A has been on fire. And that was so much fun to see. It is so much more fun to be interactive. So this will be this recording will be out in your inboxes soon together with a write-up. We'll be back on February 12th. That's also a Thursday, also at 3 p.m. with the last of the webinars. That will be about trade and AI. So that will be more forward-looking. And then hope to see a lot of you in Geneva, as many as we can fit into the room. Yes, please. And that write-up, the reason that we're doing the write-up is to share this knowledge that we get to gather here. We get to bring our friends, our experts into a call. These write-ups are made so that they can grow legs and travel to capitals and help the trade officials there prepare for the negotiations. So without further ado, I'm going to let everybody go on their merry ways to their very busy lives. Thank you so very much for today. And any questions, just keep sending them in. We'll try to cover it all. Thank you so very much. Bye.